Good afternoon and welcome to the second of three webinars hosted by the Holland Business Chamber in Southern Africa with support from NZZARDEN and NABC. My name is Johan Prins. We are looking at the impact of COVID-19 on food security, on supply lines and on small businesses. I'm joined happily again this afternoon by an eminent panel of guests. I'll start with you, Anna Saris, Port of Rotterdam. You're the business manager for agro-food and distribution. Welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Exactly. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
We'll also be joined by Wandile Sihlobo, who's chief economist at Agribiz, by Tsepo Maeko, who is the VP head of agri-sales enablement for Africa at APSA, and by Keith Wallace, who is the portfolio manager for Hivos Food and Lifestyle Fund. Keith is with us already. Keith, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
I think I'm going to start this afternoon with you, Anna. From the southern point of Africa, we tend sometimes to look at our own situation. You have a nicely global perspective on what's happening in food distribution at the moment. Just before we begin, give us a quick sense of the centrality of the Port of Rotterdam in food and goods distribution in Europe.
Yes, well, thank you. To give you an idea, we are the biggest port in Europe. And on a yearly basis, our throughput is about 470 million tons. And in sense of containers, because that's only part of our business, we do about 14.5 million TEU, so 20 feet containers. If we look at the reefer containers and the perishable, the agro-food business, that's about 13% of all our business handled in containers. So you can imagine that about 1/3 of all the imported food products in Europe enters via the Port of Rotterdam.
So if you're a South African producer or a Southern African producer, it's quite likely that a large percentage of your output, if it's getting into Europe, is going to go through Rotterdam.
Exactly. The main container liners that are leaving from the ports of Durban, Port Elizabeth, and Cape Town are mostly have Rotterdam as the first port of call in Northwest Europe.
All right. So with COVID lockdown, we're in day 14 now of our lockdown. What sorts of changes in volumes have you seen so far?
Well, actually, for the food business, it's the impacts is very different over the various products. What we see is that there's a high demand of products that are supposedly high in vitamin C, so especially citrus, but also bananas and apples, pears. They are very popular at the moment, and in the first week of the measures here, we've seen quite some hoarding by consumers. Other products, though, like more the exotic products, the demand is actually falling down. And
if I can just interrupt you, there some sense of the percentages. If we're seeing an increase in demand or decrease in demand, are we talking 2-3% or 15%? Give us a sense of the order of magnitude.
It's actually really hard to say that at this moment, because it varies per product, and it varies also in the different. Let's say for retail, has of course increased a lot. They've seen an increase of 20% in some weeks compared to those weeks of last year. But as you probably know, food service and restaurants have closed down fully. So several businesses have been hit hard on those, and volumes have dropped significantly, sometimes even down to zero.
Now, in preparation for this conversation, we had a quick conversation a day or so ago, and you said one of the things that's striking to you is that overall volumes are holding up, and that logistically the system at the moment is still working. Do you want to just give us a quick sense of how well we're coping in the midst of this crisis?
Yeah, well, that's good issue, and I think what is good to know is that both the food sector as well as the port and all the logistic activities that are associated with it, they've been classified as vitally important processes. So all the cargo handling, all the production continues, and all the employees are in these industries are allowed to work and are allowed to travel to their work. There are no restrictions on that. So the port is working as usual, and we see the same amount of vessels still coming in. Also, if I've been talking to a lot of the cold store operations in the port, and even though they have to scale down with the number of shifts and spread the shifts a bit more, they can still handle the volumes that they can see that they get. So they are all running well. Also on important services like the customs and the food inspections. They are also they are also vital in this time of year. So also they are still running, and actually everything is well. Some companies even say it's business as usual. Where we will see a drop in the next weeks, especially, is in imports from Asia, because there have been a lot of blank sailings announced, but will less affect our imports from South Africa.
Blank sailings? Just explain that concept to me for a sec.
It's where the shipping lines don't make a call in certain ports. So there will be a lot of the capacity will be cut from certain areas.
All right. What sorts of leading indicators do you have? Because essentially what we're looking at now is in many cases container shipping that would have departed their ports weeks ago. Are you getting any indication that people are beginning to make different decisions now for commodities that may be departing in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks' time?
Well, it's very difficult to estimate volumes and to estimate consumer demand also. Lots of it's going to have depend on also on food service and restaurants. There's slow rumors that they might be opening up in the next few weeks, although in very strict restrictions there. That will help the business. And importers are looking at the volumes, and indeed, I should say that those decisions have to be made now, because it takes a few weeks, of course, before the products get here. However, for the main commodities, let's say like citrus and like a lot of the fruits, there doesn't seem to be so much of a difference. When you're talking about the specialties, it's a different situation. At the moment in Holland, it's the asparagus season is starting, and those have that's a serious business, and which have been impacted, and people are not buying so much.
All right. What changes have you had to make to operations so far? And I'm thinking about staffing, about shifts, about services you're offering, but also about hygiene measures.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's good to mention that as a port authority, we don't have our own operation. It's the private companies in the port, like the terminals and like the cold stores, who are handling the distribution. From a port authority, we have, of course, taken measures in a way that we are consulting with the whole port sector. So there's a twice weekly consultation, which are attendees of the local nautical service providers, terminal operations, any supply chain partners, so that we can monitor all developments very carefully. And if we see that there are any hiccups anywhere in the chain, we can take action. And what we see is what I already mentioned at, let's say, the cold stores, but also at the terminal operations, is that they are making sure, let's say, that shifts which are normally slightly overlapping, that they are now not overlapping, that there's a time gap in between, so to prevent any interaction there. Of course, also the social distancing. So people, even on production lines where they are packing fruit, they are trying to keep social distancing and the 1.5 meter ahead. For the trucks entering the terminals, there are very strict regulations to, of course, sanitize and also use as much digital entering services as possible to protect and to prevent any physical contamination there.
So in terms of customs and hygiene standards, changes in regulations have been mainly aimed at making things safer, but also moving things along faster. Is that right?
Exactly, because that's in the end, in Europe, we're very dependent on our imports of food products. And I think every country in the European Union is very aware that this supply chain needs to be running. What we have seen in the hinterland as well is that there in the first weeks there were some delays at the borders of, let's say, Germany, Poland, Austria, also between Holland and Belgium. And because we have all the contacts and with good lobbying throughout the whole sector, actually, there's been now the introduction of green lanes so that trucks don't have to wait at the border, and inspections are there not only for the people just traveling there.
Okay, so let me see if I can summarize. If I'm an agro producer in South Africa, what I need to know at the moment is the distribution channel remains open, it's functioning. It's been remarkably adaptive, given that none of us were expecting quite for this to happen just now. There may be questions in terms of demand, but there's no question of being able to supply into the European market. Is that a fair summary?
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Now you were talking about lobbying, so if he's joined us, I'd like to turn to Wandile Sihlobo, who's the chief economist at Agbiz. Wandile, good afternoon. And welcome. Talking about lobbying, just give us a quick rundown, a 1-minute rundown, if you will, of what it is that Agbiz generally does and what you've been focusing on during this crisis. Wandile, we have, for some reason, lost your sound. So I'm going to ask you just to check your sound again. You might just need to take out the headsets. I think that's going to be your best option. Let's see if we have Wandile now. Are you with us? No, you're still muted. Wandile, I'm going to come right back to you. I'm going to, just for a moment, I'm going to move on to Keith Wallace. Keith, you're in impact investing. And you had a very nice explanation for me when we discussed it earlier of what impact investing used to be. I'm going to ask you what you do and how that's changed over the last few weeks.
Well, I think impact investing is quite well understood, that it's about more than making a financial return. It's about making a return on people and planet as well. And we are attached to one of the Netherlands' biggest NGOs, HIVOS, which has been looking and working in the food environment for more than 60 years. So we're here, we're investing in Southern Africa. We have a food and lifestyle fund. And the last few weeks have meant huge changes, because our normal business is to work alongside the companies to make sure that they're growing and that more impact is created. And with this crisis, we've really had to change our way of working, to look at the companies, to ask them how they are going to look at the crisis and adapt to the crisis. Because, I mean, I think it's clear to everyone that our way of life is changing now. The idea in the Netherlands that's being talked about is the 1.5 meter economy that's coming up, that people will be a little distance from each other. And we're hearing reports from the World Bank that perhaps trade next year could be 30% lower than it is right now. So all of the companies in our portfolio are going to have to adapt to that. They need to look at the economic reality. We hope it's going to be better than that 30% fall that's being predicted. But we're working with each one of them to make sure that they're putting procedures in place to deal with COVID, but also they're there and they're ready for what is afterwards, a whole new economic reality.
So I want to get back in a second to Wandile, but let me preface my question to him with this question to you. What sort of support do businesses need in the South African or Southern African markets at the moment? What sorts of questions are businesses asking, and what answers are they struggling to get?
I think that the businesses in Southern Africa are like the businesses in the rest of the world. They'd like to know what the future is going to look like, but no one has a crystal ball. We can't predict it. So what we're doing is to work together, to look at questions, to look at the future quite well. The companies in the portfolio are now working together, sharing their tips over how to deal with the crisis, over what they think the future of their markets is going to look like, so that they are better placed to be able to take this on in the future. And I think
I think
that's
that's something that we're learning across the board is speak to each other,
yeah.
share information. We have to learn, and we have to learn quickly now. Wandile, if we have you, and I hope we do, and I hope we have sound on you. I suppose one of the big things that this crisis is teaching businesses is that it's important to be able to band together into organizations like AgBiz, so that there's somebody to fight your corner when it's necessary.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, because a lot of difficulties on the South African food sector side was really on the regulatory side over the past few weeks or so. Because, as you know, we are on essential services, fully operational at this point, but there was a lot of areas that had ambiguities, and we had to work through that on easing all the regulatory hindrances. And I mean, the last industry that I would say it's still on the difficulties is, for example, the wool sector, wine sector are still one of those that are still really in a difficult side. But obviously, continuous engagement and making sure that we're speaking with one voice under one organization, but also in the process ensuring that we abide by all the health regulations so that we don't spread the COVID-19. So that's really one of the things that we've been thinking about. But at the core is really the sustainability of the food sector and the agribusinesses.
So, Wandile, what are the biggest risks at the moment to food sustainability in terms of production, distribution, and sales in South Africa, not just into the South African market, but also into, for instance, European market through the port of Rotterdam? What are the big risks you're worried about at the moment?
Now, I think the big risk on the global agricultural market is really the supply chain's sustainability. We've seen already a number of people closing off their borders on key commodities. And I think that's one of the key risks, because not all countries are self-sufficient. Some are good in particular commodities, some are good in other commodities. So through the exchange, we all get to be on a balanced footing. But I think now a number of countries are already placing out some of the restrictions that might make the global agricultural market inefficient. But for the South African perspective, and also some of the Southern African countries, for example, Botswana, to Swaziland, I would say the next 12 months, we are relatively on solid footing in as far as food supplies. We are fortunate in a sense that we are getting COVID-19 challenges in a year where from a food production side, we're expecting record harvest of a number of commodities. So we will be able to be sufficient. But obviously, looking on at the end of this year, going into 2021, that's going to be an important period because it's a replanting season. And we're already seeing in areas like the US, where some of the areas are beginning to struggle with going to the plantings. Now, the hope is that by that time, towards the end of the year, there might be a vaccine or something to really control the spread of the virus.
We heard Anna saying a little bit earlier that the regulatory focus, at least insofar as the port of Rotterdam is concerned, from local regulators has been about how do we speed things up whilst maintaining food safety and hygiene. Has that been your experience with regulators and government in South Africa? Are they focused on making things faster and more efficient?
I think that's been the key focus, and I mean it's also delighted to hear that on a European side it's that way, because Europe on its own, I mean, it's an important market to South Africa. About 40% of our agricultural exports goes to the EU market, so that's an important area for us. But I think on ensuring the ease of trade, that has been priority. In the first 2 days, that's only when we had glitches due to ambiguities in the regulation side. But since then, I mean, policymakers in South Africa has really been swift on responding on to what the industry has been raising. And so far, I would say we are having some good flow of products. Obviously, not at the optimal speed that you would like in normal times, but we are satisfied with how things are moving at this point.
All right, I'm going to come back a little bit in a few seconds just to talk about tobacco and wine and wool, etc. I just want to bring in for the moment Tsepo Maeko, who's at APSA, who used to be an agronomist and then became a banker, who must have heard many jokes about growing money on trees then. Tsepo, welcome. Thank you for joining us. So what we're hearing is that the distribution system seems to be working fairly well. Businesses would like a crystal ball so that they can see the future. One of the things that businesses, big and small, must be worried about is access to capital, access to credit. What's your broad sense of our situation at the moment, especially in the agro sector?
Sure. Johan, it's a very difficult time now from the banking side. One, we expect business are going to take time to turn around their cash to cash conversion cycles, and already we've seen a few of our key clients are restructuring their facilities in anticipation of the slowness of cash, leaving and coming back into their business. So we're mindful in keeping a careful watch on potential impairments that are going to come into the system. However, it's not all doom and gloom. Governments and reserve banks have taken good policies in terms of supporting, commercial banks to continue providing, financial services to certain selected sectors, and among those, it's agriculture, as it's been identified as a key sector. This is across all the regions, from Ghana, Kenya, South Africa as well, So I think it's a matter of how do as bankers encourage our farmers, our clients, our agri clients, to be able to look outside of their square box in terms of where the opportunities to generate cash is going to come from, because we still want them to keep on farming. It's their good business remains our good business too, So on that basis, we concerned but not overly worried about what could turn out to be.
All right, so you have to walk up a thin line. On the one hand, you want to get liquidity into the system. You want to make sure that businesses which are fundamentally sound work, even if there's a bit of a cash flow crunch. But on the other side, you need to protect the quality of the book. You need to make sure that defaults don't rise and destabilize the bank itself. Are you seeing a clear path in balancing those imperatives at the moment, or do you think that window is going to be quite narrow?
Look, the banking sector, from a South African perspective, it's always been very, very well defined in terms of framework of doing business. So there isn't much concern in terms of how we're going to look at the good business versus a bad business. A bad business remains a best business, whether it will have been under COVID-19 or not. That's what it is. However, the due consideration now, going forward is to take a view to say, how is that sector being looked at by government in particular, in terms of baking up that particular sector, back into full scale productivity. At the back of that, we are able to, relook at deals that will otherwise be identified as necessary in the economy. So we're not going to lower down the standard of looking at a deal. However, we are going to take, cognizance of what the policy environment is in a particular territories, in order to determine whether the deal is good or not.
All right. So just give us a quick sense, if you can. There's a balance between monetary policy and fiscal policy and regulation, and in a number of markets, including in South Africa, governments have begun tweaking regulations a little bit to make it easier for banks to lend. What sort of impact have those tweaks had on your ability to lend into the Southern African market?
I think if you look at South African market, the bulk of the staple crops are going into harvesting now. So we actually were in a very slow period now. Give it a month or two, once the guys are into full scale harvesting, while in the next few weeks we are going to full scale harvesting and immediately preparing for the next season, we are going to see lots of clients coming in for facilities. But the current facilities on the book, are treated as business as usual. The guys are expected to harvest, as you read from my colleague Wandile. We're expecting a bumper crop, and in some of the subsectors within the agri, sector, we've seen an uptick in terms of uptake of farmers buying new equipment, in preparation for the harvest, and we've seen lots and lots of inquiries with tractors as well. So we do expect that come the preparation for the next planting season, we are going to have a few more inquiries from the farmers, unless otherwise something drastic happens, in terms of what the levels of COVID impact is going to be in the economy and what the government do in terms of, again, the controls of movement of people into the economy.
So if I'm a producer at the moment, sorry, I interrupted you there for a sec. But if I'm a producer at the moment access to capital is not going to be any more difficult than it would usually be. You might even make it a little bit easier for me, especially if I'm producing in the agri sector. Does that sound about right?
That's about right. And we've seen the Reserve Bank making an announcement to ensure that at least the bank's reserves, are no longer required at 100%, but I think it's taken down to 80%. So we are being encouraged to on lend to farmers.
All right. I have a question from Sharam Razadeh. I hope I said that roughly correctly. And anybody who's watching, you're welcome in the comment section. Please post your question. We'll try and get to it as soon as we can. The question, he says, question to banks: what are the main obstacles providing loans at the moment to smallholder farmers? Is it about financial history data? Is it about access to relationship or access to other information? If I don't have an existing relationship with a bank, is now a good time for me to try and develop that relationship, or should I be falling back on old relationships?
All the relationships in the bank are much easier to manage, easy to look at how to do a deal. New relationships are always difficult. Going back to the question from, Sharam, I think he asked the main obstacles to providing financials with small-scale farmers.
Yep.
The answer is his second part: lack of financial history and data, let alone good quality data for that matter. Most of the small-scale farmers doesn't keep any records, or at least record that can stand a test of credit checks and all that. So that becomes a big issue in terms of having to advance facilities to the small-scale farmers.
And that's the main problem. Is there a fairly sound underlying business, and do you have data to show that that's the case?
We are having various engagements with a few fintechs, particularly out of South Africa. South African market is fairly easy to do lending, and even the small scale farmers in South Africa, it's a bit much more different than you will find in other emerging markets, beyond the borders of South Africa. So we are engaging partners that are able to help us build a reputable data system that we can use to make sound financial judgments on a small scale farmers. That's simply because we recognize that 80% of food produced into the continent comes from smallholder farmers. So without a shadow of a doubt, we do need to address their access to finance. And if we do that, we definitely are going to unlock a big potential for the business. However, there is a regulatory environment that prohibits us to recklessly go on lend, for the sake of on lending.
All right. Just a last quick question before I go back to Wandile. Are there regulations that you wish, looking specifically at South Africa now, that you wish the government would institute, regulatory tweaks that you wish they would make, that you would advise them to make at this point to make it easier for capital to flow? Nope. I think we might have lost you. Wandile, I'm going to come back to you for a sec.
Yeah.
One of the things that we are seeing is what looks like a little bit of an increase in economic nationalism. And I'm not just talking about the trade war, I'm talking about the things which are happening now. For instance, some countries putting bans on exports of rice, for instance. You were talking earlier about the global supply chains being more efficient. And if those global supply chains start breaking, we're looking at less efficiency, which means higher prices, lower revenues for some producers. If you had to look into your crystal ball, do you think that that's going to be a sustained issue, or is it a momentary reaction to the current crisis?
My sense is that it's really driven by fear of the current crisis, because we are looking at this, the countries are looking at this, and they have no sense of for how long will this crisis last. And what we've seen them now, various countries blocking borders on, is to ensure that they have sufficient supplies within these various countries to last them for a relatively longer period because of the uncertainty of this current condition. I don't think that it's something that could last for longer. I think once we have recovered from this pandemic, markets could return back to normality, because at the end of the day, those people that are running various businesses in all of the countries are looking at the most efficient things that can sustain their businesses. and blocking the borders and ensuring that you're only producing for your country. Yes, it might ensure that there is supply for a particular period, but it might not be a way to sustain your business and remain profitable for a longer period. So I think this is really a reaction to all of the uncertainty and the fear and anxiety that is out there that's leading to people to make these drastic decisions.
But if I'm a small scale or a medium scale producer in South Africa or in Southern Africa at the moment, and I'm going to be harvesting soon, then I need to start planting. I need to be thinking about where I'm going to be selling to. Should I be hedging my bets by expanding the number of potential clients now? Is that something I should be looking at urgently?
Yeah, I mean, you can look at that because the bottom line story is that the demand for agricultural products will remain there. Regardless of what happens, but it's only regulatory environment that could hinder the demand patterns or the delivery patterns of the products. And the fortunate thing about those that are farming in South Africa is the fact that also the South African government about 2 days back made sure that there is an allocation of roughly about 1.2 billion rands, which is going to be assisting medium and small scale farmers that are really financially, not financially sound at the moment because of COVID-19. So there is some bit of cushion that will be there for them, but obviously going through some certain criteria to be able to access those funds. But the bottom line story of saying, should I be expanding my business activity, looking for opportunities? I think people should do that. And the next step in any way on the South African side, both from business and also from the lawmakers side, there's already starting to be a thinking of saying, post-COVID-19, what will be the recovery stage? As we are beginning to think about the response near term, but we also have our medium-term goals and long-term goals, because at the end of the day, our economy was hit by the pandemic already in bad shape. So we are thinking broadly to say each sector, agriculture, agribusiness, what is your long-term objective after this and your long-term growth strategy after this so that you're able to contribute to growing the fortunes of the country.
All right, so if I can just summarize where we are at the moment, almost halfway, just a little bit over halfway through today's webinar. The systems seem to be holding up. There's stresses in the system, but nothing's broken quite yet. The banks are confident that they can get capital into the market. You are watching the second of 3 webinars on the impact of COVID-19 on food security and on agribusiness, brought to you by the Holland Business Chamber in Southern Africa, the NABC and Enza. My name is Johan Prince. Keith, I want to come back to you for a second. How have the criteria that you would be looking at in terms of investing in an agribusiness in Southern Africa, how have those criteria changed from 100 days ago when China announced or reported the first case of COVID-19 to the World Health Organization and now?
I think that the easiest way of explaining that is that we're really open to the situation with the company. We are looking at specific sectors and investing in those. Certain sectors have fallen away because retail right now, we really don't know what's going to happen there. We have a very good pipeline of companies that we're working with. Some of them have even come to us and said, can you help us out in this period until we get to the post-COVID economy? And that's something that we've had to say no. You need to embrace the change that's there right now. You need to be able to do that long-term planning and figure out how you're going to survive in the new economy. So from 100 days ago, we were looking at, we have a 75-question due diligence process where we bring companies into our portfolio. Those questions are pretty much the same. We are looking at future markets. We are looking at the entrepreneurs, but we want to see an entrepreneur that is open to the opportunity as well as the problems in the environment. And I don't want to see people that see this as a true problem, but those that are looking at the opportunity in the situation in which they find themselves. Those are the kinds of companies that we can invest in. Those have always been the kinds of companies we could invest in. And we just got another $1 million into the fund. We want to deploy it in Southern Africa. South Africa and Malawi and Zambia are the markets that we're targeting. And I want to find those companies. So you don't need to go to the bank. You don't need to get debt capital. You can still come to someone like the HIVOS Food and Lifestyle Fund, because we are there. We are looking to increase our pipeline. we are looking at bringing companies into the portfolio. We're in negotiation stage right now with 3 companies, and the conversations with them are exceptionally useful at understanding how they are adapting to the environment. Now, are they seen as essential businesses? Are they able to continue operating? And I'm getting feedback that I've never had from the companies before, saying, well, we'd love to get our workers in, but they just can't make it out of their settlements.
Right.
They want to come, they want to work. So it really is about that continuing dialogue with the companies, of understanding them and keeping them to the very same levels that we were looking at before, but just with the reality of the crisis.
Let me ask this question then. If I'm a small, medium-sized agro producer, I suppose the biggest danger for me at the moment is I panic, is that things look so uncertain and so different from how things used to look that I panic. I start making rash decisions. I need access to help. Are you as an investor, or Tsepo, you as a banker, or Wandile as an industry organization, are you doing everything that you can to reach out to producers to say, this is where you can find assistance, this is the assistance that's available, this is where you can find additional information? Is that outreach sufficient, do you think? Is it effective? I'm going to start with you, Wandile.
Yeah, I think that is sufficient. But obviously, it can always be improved. I mean, day in, day out, we are in constant communication, so that we can have a finger on the pulse on where are the glitches in the South African food system. Either you are looking on trade or you are looking within our borders. So I think the flow of information back and forth has actually increased now, because I would say our jobs compared to before COVID-19 and now, it has actually become much intenser, because we have to be talking to everyone in the food chain throughout the whole day to ensure that things are in order. And obviously, on that exchange of communication, the issues around regulation, the issues around finance, and whatever potential support that's needed to ensure the sustainability of the South African agribusiness and the agricultural sector is the key objective of it. So I would say producers, I hope they're relatively satisfied with the interactions we've been having with them throughout these past few days, and will continue to have in the coming days.
All right, Tsepo, is communication good enough, do you think, at the moment?
Absolutely. One of the things that we did, in preparation for working from home, the lockdown, is we ensure that our relationship executives are able to communicate, stay in touch with the clients during and throughout the lockdown period. So we are able to reach out to the clients, engage them. We don't only want to phone the farmer when we see there's an issue. We do make absolute human phone calls. How are you? How are you doing? What's going on with the business? That's very highly encouraged. And on the high end, from our executive side, they're all forming, various parallel formations across the different countries. You go to Kenya, you'll find that the MD of APSA Kenya is part of the team put together by the presidency in that country to address issues of COVID-19 from a banking and financial services perspective. And in that, the voice of the farmers will also be represented, because the bank look at the business holistically, not just purely as a financial services provider. The same applies to Ghana. We form part of the formations in the country in terms of what the government is doing and trying to achieve in terms of ensuring that sanity prevails, and a sense of calm and message of the plans that have been put in place is communicated through the population in a very responsible manner. The same applies here in South Africa too. We're doing the same. We are regularly on calls, with colleagues from the RICS department, as well as from the principals. So there's absolute, the determination and a sense of wanting to drive a calm message across our clients. We are part of the community after all.
All right, Anna, I'm going to come back to you. We're going to end the afternoon on a high note, but now I think we'll go down a little bit. What's the thing that keeps you up at night at the moment? What are you worried about?
Well, besides, of course, hopefully that everyone remains healthy and this crisis is managed as soon as possible. What we see from an agri-food perspective in the port is that where the imports are actually going well, as I said, almost business as usual. The exports are a different issue, and that's what I'm mostly talking about: meat, but also French fries, those kind of products, because the warehouses are actually getting full, and there's a huge demand for frozen capacity of warehousing, and that's a big issue now in Holland, but also in Northwest Europe.
All right, Tsepo, what's keeping you up at night at the moment?
I'm a very optimistic person. What worries me is I tend to wonder if I'm a good enough teacher to keep my kids, homeland. But on the business side, I am excited that the future is not going to be the same as it was before, and for that, those that have already made a move prior COVID-19 and maybe still possibly now to position their business for what the newness is going to be are those that are going to become the winners going forward. And I'm more optimistic that my employer has put in place systems to carry the business beyond the current crisis as posed by COVID-19. So I'm very, very much optimistic about the future, and I guess I'm in the right sector. People will need food. Wandile made mention the demand for food is never going to go down. The question is, how are we going to get it from the farm to the table? And those that are in a place to do that will definitely make a success of it.
So what are the biggest changes that you're expecting now? I see there's a question on the comments. Do you think lending to smallholder farmers would be easier against assets like warehousing, receipts, rural storage financing? That's a risk assessment question in a sense. But it goes to the question of how will the bank's business change in what must surely be a changing world and a changing industry?
I think to summarize that question, basically, is asking if we are able to advance facilities to aggregators. The answer is yes, we're doing it already. And matter of fact, in most of the territories, beyond South Africa, we look at aggregators that are able to manage the farming operations with the farmers, and then we use them as the intermediaries to advance the facilities to the small-scale farmers. So the answer is we're already doing it. Perhaps the secondary question to that you should be asking is, how are we going to ensure that the farmer is empowered in that value chain? And what I mean by that is the farmer able to access the information as to how much the bank charges the intermediary in terms of interest rates, and how much that intermediary advances that facility to the farmer at what cost? And to that effect, we're launching a product soon in Zambia. We've already done that in Kenya. We will be doing Ghana as well, wherein we're launching a platform where the small-scale farmers or smallholder farmers are able to access, live information as to what is happening in the value chain between them, the intermediary, and the off-takers. So we're putting them in the same ecosystem so that transparency doesn't come into questions. And out of that, we are able to collect data and information for future credit decisions out of those small-scale farmers.
Keith, question to you, and I may be whatever the opposite of Pollyanna is at the moment, but on the one end, I'm reading articles where people are saying this may be a second Great Depression. On the other end, when I speak to businesses or business organizations, the answer I'm getting is, well, everything's kind of okay at the moment. Yeah. Are we fooling ourselves? Are we being insensitive to the degree of risk that there exists at the moment?
I think there are two ways of looking at that. I hope that you are right. I hope that the people that say that we are going to move back very quickly to the economy as it was before are correct. Unfortunately, I do see parallels with the Great Depression. I do see institutions that are very respected, such as the World Bank, predicting up to 32% reduction in world trade. Now, those are massive figures. We see it's been 25 years since Africa went into recession, and that wasn't at the levels of 30% of the economy. Now, this could be a huge change for all of us. I hope I'm wrong, But I do know that talking with the companies that are in the portfolio, talking with other entrepreneurs, they are planning for how they're going to survive in different worlds that could exist after this. So let's hope for the best, let's prepare for the worst, and let's be realistic and entrepreneurial in how we look at these situations. Because even those companies right now that think their markets are going to continue exactly as they are, need to understand that all of the people in lockdown are learning new behavior patterns. They're learning to bring food in, produce in, rather than go out and consume it. So there could be a very different behavioral pattern that consumers have afterwards. There could be huge changes in industry. I don't see every airline being rescued by its respective government. So we could see whole sectors falling away. So companies need to be open at trying to sell to others. And if everyone is entrepreneurial, if everyone is going after the opportunity that's there, then I think we will start growing again quite quickly. But it could be a few years away. And I don't think this is over within another 6 months. The more successful we are at fighting COVID, the more likely it is to have a resurgence. And as we move from winter in the north into winter in the south, there could be resurgence. And this could have very long-term effects on all of us. So again, my plea, let's be entrepreneurial and let's use business to get out of this.
Right. So let me summarize it this way. Don't panic, but if you're comfortable, get uncomfortable.
Yes. Anyone who's comfortable right now is fooling themselves. Right? There were a lot of people when we went into the Great Depression, if we read the books, that said, it's not going to happen to me. I'm very comfortable. My business has been running for generations. Well, what we're seeing when we look out there is that companies aren't able to survive 2 or 3 months without revenue coming in, with staff, with premises, with bills to pay. Everyone is at risk. And I look out the window here in The Hague, and there's hardly anyone on the street. The companies are closed, and it's really unsure when they're going to open. And the lockdown that has been imposed in South Africa and elsewhere is pushing down business hugely. Now, only France and Germany have come out with their figures 7 and possibly 10% down on the previous quarter. It's really, really serious stuff.
So Wandile, back to you for a second. What's keeping you up at night at the moment? What you had to list your 2 or 3 biggest worries. What are they right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think my worry is entangled again with the work at ACBIS and also the work that I do in government, because the numbers we are looking at this point with just this minor lockdown that we have in South Africa is over 1 million of unemployment that we expect. And also South Africa's GDP could contract by at least 4% this year. That's the numbers that are out there. And some numbers in the market are even bigger than that. Now, the worry is to say, if you are having an economy that is contracting, you are having unemployment that was already high, officially at 29%, and then now 1 million or more coming on an unemployment line. How is South Africa actually going to cope with that? Which is one of the things then that is occupying ourselves and also the other sectors of the economy in South Africa on saying, what do they plan? What can they do to make sure that at least post-COVID-19, we are able to survive? I mean, the comments that were just made now about the current situation that we are in the world economy being one of the most extraordinary time. I mean, I think those are quite correct. World trade, a possibility of reducing by almost 32% this year. That's massive. And South Africa's economy is largely dependent on trade, because some other point is the fact that whatever we can do in restarting production on our side in various sectors outside of agriculture, we also depend on our trading partner getting back on footing. And I'm not seeing that in the near term happening. And I think all of those things is really one that worries us a lot at this point. South Africa is not in a good place in an economic perspective.
So Wandile, you talk about 4% down. You talk about a million additional unemployed. Those are based on what kind of assumption for the duration of a lockdown or a significant slowdown?
Those are basically.
Are we talking about the damage that we've done or that we have already? But if you're assuming that we go back to work sometime in April?
Those assumptions are based on a duration saying we have a lockdown of about 2 months or so. So that's what many people are looking at, and that's how we're coming up with all of those numbers. But not only for agriculture, but that's the overall economy of South Africa. The agricultural sector is not going to see contraction. In fact, our numbers for the year, we're looking at a 10% growth on agriculture, but all other sectors of the economy are really in bad footing. So that's why in aggregate, we are looking really in bad shape as a country in as far as economic fortunes and unemployment side.
What is the probability, would you say, or is there a probability, let me rather ask the question that way, that producers are going to look at something like the lockdown, the possibility that we may have more than one lockdown, and that this may speed up, for instance, the adoption of automation in food production, which might feed back into unemployment? Is that a feasible risk, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I have an essay that is coming out on Project Syndicate soon. And one of the points that I'm arguing or I'm addressing on that is particularly the point that you are raising. Parts of Europe, for example, when you read The Economist last week, their issue, they're talking about a number of areas where France, Holland, Italy, and even the United States are struggling to have enough farm workers to go and harvest in some other areas. And I think that in the long run, all of these headaches that people are getting now, they will feed through on ensuring that there is some acceleration in automation. But I think that is going to start in Europe and the United States, and over time it will diffuse to Southern Africa. So in the near term, I still think that in South Africa, we have to expand, for example, agriculture as one of the sectors that can absorb some people to work on this sector. But as we do that, we have to be cognizant that that will be a short-term measure. In the long run, we'll have to be thinking about how do we upskill people to make sure that at least they are absorbed in the labor market. But certainly the technological changes, I think they will be faster now post-COVID-19 than if we didn't have this pandemic.
All right. Then a last quick question, I think, about the transformation. Then we'll try and end on a hopeful note. One of the things that this might do is the crisis might destroy the smaller players in the agribusiness industry. People who don't have access to capital, who don't have reserve funds, for instance, resulting in a concentration of the industry, which in the end might mean less consumer choice, higher prices. Is that, Tsepo, something that we should be worried about? Is that something that you think may be likely under these circumstances?
We have already seen that happen in East Africa, in Kenya in particular. In prior COVID-19, they've been dealing with the swarms of locusts, and what we've seen happen already in that sector was that the horticultural sector, the flower markets, most of the big flower producers were already looking at expansions, and the smaller guy was not having the capacity to do that. So there's already consolidation in that market, and come the peak time of their sales, which is Valentine's in February, there was delayed rains and so forth. They didn't have enough sunshine. So just a few days or a week before Valentine's, they were then able to pick up, some of the flowers and send it to Europe. But that was too late because most of those orders should have been, already in Europe at that time of the year. So we've seen already consolidation in that sector. Next up, we're closely looking at the tea sector in Kenya. The bigger guys have got the balance sheet and the capability to maintain and keep business open. The smaller guys are struggling. Similarly, we see the same trends in Zambia. So the bigger the guy, he's got the capacity, the balance sheet to support the business. They are able to extend and stretch their working capital. Across the difficulties that are imposed by COVID-19. So it is a consolidation, and unfortunately, that's what it is. That's what happens when I guess the recession hits the economy.
Is there anything that's being done systemically in South Africa or throughout the region to support smallholder farmers, to support emerging commercial farmers, or are they just likely to be a casualty of this process?
the biggest movement that we've seen from the banking side is to move SME lending to mobile money. That way we are able to advance some amount of money to small businesses. But then again, the issue with short-term lending is you're never able to lend enough capital to a small-scale farm or a small business big enough for them to expand quickly. So it becomes money that they can turn around quickly, generate cash, pay you back, and then come back again and borrow more money. So it just really becomes a vicious cycle. But there is concerted effort to look at the SME sector from a long-term perspective in terms of what needs to be done to ensure that the SME sector becomes a long-term type business. So it's not all doom and gloom from banking side. We are looking at means and ways to do that. As I alluded earlier on, we've got a fintech partner already on board, in ABSA to particularly address the SME lending, and how do we ensure that we can build, long-term scalable business with them.
Keith Wallace, are you interested in small investment opportunities at the moment, or are you looking for scale?
We're interested in small opportunities that could scale in the future. So we tend to have a two-pronged approach with investing. We come in with a smaller amount in the company when it's in its early stages, and then we would look at having follow-on investment in the future. So we're fully open. You mentioned you wanted me to be a little more positive than my views on the world economy, and I think I can be in this. We would love to get more opportunities. We'd like to get people sending us in their business plan. We'd like to get to know new entrepreneurs. We've got a perfect person in South Africa that deals with this, Bernice Robertson, representative in Zambia that deals with Zambia and Malawi. So we're open. Contact us, and we'll see what we can do to help build the business of your dreams that we can build impact with, and together grow.
Wandile, should people, if they're not already Agbiz members, is now a good time to find yourself a home in Agbiz?
Yeah, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, then some of the aspirations that you have, you'll be able to be represented. But more than that, I think it's also the network to be in touch with some of the other agribusinesses and the finances, people like Tsepo who are already members of Agbiz. So there is that ecosystem so that you'll be able to be supported during this difficult time.
All right, now the highlight, the things that make you hopeful and that you are grateful for. Anna, I started this discussion with you. I will begin this last question with you. Are you surprised? And we can't see the future and we don't know what might happen, but so far, are you pleasantly surprised by how well everything is held up and how well all of the systems are coping?
Yes, I think the whole industry, the whole agro-food logistics industry, from sourcing to retail, is very adaptive. We've had a few days where we had empty shelves, but this was only a few days. And looking at the times, the lead times of some of the supply chains, it's been incredible how quickly we had full supermarkets. We were able to supply whole Europe again. If we look on a bit longer term, the food sector is growing. We all need to eat, we all need to drink, and luckily this is a positive perspective for us. And I'm sure that the industry will also adapt to any long-term effects that this crisis might have.
All right, Wandile, I've asked you what keeps you up at night. What makes you happy at the moment?
What makes me happy at the moment is that throughout these difficulties, at least we can say for certain that over the next 12 months or so, South Africans will have sufficient food supplies. But obviously, the challenge is that not everyone can be able to afford the food. And I think the state is making measures in place to make sure that there is support for people. So difficult times, but at least people can have something to go to sleep having eaten. So I think that for me, is what gives me some good sleep and makes me happy to the extent that we've been able to be efficient.
All right, last word I think to Tsepo. We're not in a cash crisis. The banks are stable. The world hasn't quite ended yet. What makes you happy? What gives you hope?
every time I sit across the table with my credit head, across the countries, and we put together a deal for the farmer, I go home and have a peaceful sleep. It excites me to stand in the middle of any farming field. I've been to tunnels of roses in Kenya. I've stood up in the middle of nowhere in Tamale in Ghana, northern Ghana. Looking at the hopeful faces of village women that are producing maize for the local aggregators, in that country. It's just so amazing for me. The hope that Africa is going to feed the world, if we do the right things right, and hopefully we don't turn this, health crisis into financial crisis. That keeps me happy.
All right. That brings us to the end of today's webinar. I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Wandile, to Tsepo, to Keith, and to Anna. Thank you very much for making the time. Thank you for entertaining the questions. Thank you for your insight. Also to NABC, to the Holland Business Chambers in South Africa, and to Enza Zarden. Thank you very much for making this possible. And most of all, those of you who've watched and who've watched all the way through, thank you for making the time. Thank you for the questions. Please join us again for our third and last episode of the series webinars next week, Tuesday, at exactly the same time. If you're in South Africa, in fact, I think if you're in almost anywhere else, enjoy the long weekend. Thank you. Goodbye.